What's up, Oba? How are you?
I'm doing well, doing well. How are you?
I'm okay. Thanks for asking. How was your weekend? Did you do a lot?
It was interesting. It was hot.
Yeah, it's
Went to a
very hot.
concert on Thursday and Friday, so that was
Yeah.
like fun, but it's still hot. I don't have AC.
Is your school schedule tricky this semester?
No, it's actually pretty good. I have classes 9:30 Monday through Thursday, and then I have classes at 2 on Monday through Thursday. So there's like a nice gap to like do other things,
You're
but it
only
is
taking two classes?
no. I have 4 classes, so I have 2 on Tuesday, Thursday, and 2
Oh,
Monday.
okay, okay. Got it. That is nice. That sounds like a pretty well spaced schedule. Cool. Well, as I mentioned, I had some like questions prepared, and I think like the a good place to start is just you explaining what like Head Start is and like how you kind of thought of beginning it.
Yeah, happy to. I think I'll start with like the sort of stories, like how it came to be. I really just took some time to reflect as to like my freshman year experience and like things that I thought could have been done better, as well as like gaps where I thought I could help fill. So I think the first big thing was like mentorship. So like coming into UT, I didn't really know anyone, but I did
Mhm.
like the summer camps they have for high schoolers, and my camp counselor was Nairi, which you know as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And like when I first came in, I didn't understand you had to apply to clubs. I didn't know clubs are actually competitive to get into. I didn't know
Mhm.
if you didn't get in freshman fall, you might never get in again, etc. And I didn't
Yeah.
know like, start recruiting freshman fall, etc. So like at first I was just chilling, and then Nairi starts bothering me like, hey, like what clubs are you applying to? Blah blah blah. I'm like, you have to apply to clubs.
Hmm.
And then I really took some time to reflect. Like now, I'm like, wait, so if I never applied to like these clubs, I probably wouldn't have ever got these opportunities. And it's like it all started with Nairi. So I
Hmm.
wanted to like build a platform for where like people that come from similar backgrounds can sort of be connected to mentors who can actually help them get that sort of head start and advantage to really hit the ground running once like school starts. Cause like things are so fast now, whether it's like recruiting, joining clubs, etc. And I think the second sort of gap is along the lines of professional discovery within the business world.
Hmm.
So I think there's a lot of like great clubs that are like X, so like great finance clubs, great tech clubs, great consulting clubs, etc. But like I
Hmm.
think the first question you have to answer is like, what do I actually want to do? And I
Yeah.
think most people don't ever spend the time to answer that question. They just do like whatever their friends are doing, leading to like, I don't know, let's say 60% of people don't like banking or consulting without actually knowing what that entails or if they actually want to do it, just because that's what everyone else is doing. So our
Yeah.
goal is really to help freshmen and sophomores come in and really discover what they want to do like within the business world and serve as the launch pad for them to achieve those goals.
Okay. That makes sense. And I agree that that is a really big problem, like of not knowing what you want to do. I know for me, it like took like three internships in different like industries to even get an idea of which one I like industries and like job types of which one I wanted to kind of go into. So, like, when did Head Start begin? Like, when did you create it?
Yeah, so we were ideating since like last August, just
Mhm.
trying to narrow down as like what we're gonna do, how it's gonna be structurally.
Yeah.
And then we kind of came to our sort of final sort of plan around November. And then we opened up our first applications around December, so just under a year ago. And
Okay.
now we're on our cohort 2.
Got it. Well, that's exciting. Congratulations. And so how did you go about, so I'll first talk about kind of the marketing aspect and then I'll kind of go deeper into the actual program. But like how did you get the word out to students? Because I think that's something like a lot of college students, like I understand this is nonprofit, but I think with anything, whether it's a business organization, something else, getting the word out is probably really, really difficult. Like what was your strategy to reach out to as many students as you could?
Yeah, so kind of structurally, Headstart's kind of like a two-sided marketplace you can think. So there's like student
Hmm.
mentors for like upperclassmen, and then there's like the
Okay.
fellows with freshmen and sophomores.
Yeah.
So we were able to like leverage our initial like student mentors, like post in their school Slacks,
Hmm.
post in their group chats, etc. I think another thing that ended up working out pretty well is like one of the mentors is like pretty famous on TikTok. I think he has like 20,000 followers on TikTok, and he makes
Uh-huh.
like college niche content. So like that worked out pretty well. I think like somewhere like a fourth of our applications came from TikTok, and
Oh
his
wow.
TikTok
So
video.
he posted about Head Start and then okay.
Yeah, exactly. So he's
Nice.
just like if you're interested in blah 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 and you want a mentor doing blah blah blah, check this out. And people
Got
actually
it.
check it out.
Well, that sounds like it. I mean, it's a very targeted audience, so I
Yeah.
feel like that is a very good marketing channel. So, what was the incentive? Because I've heard of a lot of mentorship opportunities in terms of like upperclassmen helping younger classmen, whether that's like through the school, through an organization, stuff like that. Like, what are y'all doing differently to make sure like those relationships last and like that those upperclassmen even have like an incentive to come and join and help out?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one is sort of making sure there's like high engagement standards. So it's
Hmm.
like setting the precedent early, like, okay, if you want to be here, like you have to do X, Y, and Z to be here, or like your spot's not guaranteed. And I think another thing too is like you said, like everybody needs an incentive. So for like
Hmm.
our student mentors, we have like professionals who are also involved. So
Hmm.
like for our student mentors, the incentive is like access to the professional mentors, as well as like they also use each other's like resources. So let's say like somebody's doing X hire view. It's
Hmm.
like what's the questions on the hire view? Like somebody's probably done it, but like whether you're a freshman, sophomore, or junior, you're like you probably still want to know the questions on the hire
Yeah,
view, right?
yeah,
So one thing that's like super important
that
to
makes
us is like
sense.
sort of community and really having that engagement there. I think like a
Mhm.
lot of orgs like are cool, but they're like too serious. It's like we're
Yeah.
trying to be productive, but like in a great manner. We're like we're all friends and we're all cool with
Hmm.
each other, as well as like you're more incentivized to stay engaged if like you feel the other people in the org are your friends.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is this an org through the school or you're just doing it like outside of the school?
Yeah, so it's outside of UT. We have over 40 schools represented in our first cohort.
Hmm. Oh, wow. How many people are in each cohort?
Yeah, so first cohort was 40 fellows and 45 or so student mentors. And
Uh-huh.
our next cohort, we expect it to grow around 50 to 70%. So we expect right now, I think we have like 70 student mentors, and we expect to take somewhere around like 70 to 80 fellows.
Why do you like what's causing this growth?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because when we first started, it was just gonna be like I literally only had like 12 of my friends who were student mentors. I was like,
Uh-huh.
oh, we're just gonna take 12 kids.
Yeah.
But I think over time, like as like when things are good, they sort of sell themselves. So
Hmm.
I think a lot of like the people that are applied are like, oh, my friend told me about it, or oh, I
That's
saw this
good.
person was in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's like the product is good and we have to sort of keep it up so that people can still want to be a part of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's kind of the best way things could grow. Because I know there's a lot of people who like try to start some like initiative or something like that, and then it probably dies out like after a year. But it's good that the cohort's growing. Have you been a student mentor at this point, or are you kind of just doing the administrative like organizational stuff?
Yeah, so in cohort one, I had two sort of fellows that were like my mentees. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, I mean, it was a really fulfilling experience. I think like a lot of people have questions, and just building an environment where people are comfortable to ask those questions, like sort of super fulfilling. It's always like
Uh-huh.
seeing people do cool things. So it's like, hey, you came in thinking X, and then now you're doing Y, and like we helped you get to Y. Like that's super fulfilling. As
Yeah.
well as like even just seeing you grow from a learning perspective, whether it's like, hey, I came, like everybody comes in saying I want to be a banker, and then you're like,
Hmm.
wait, I actually really want to spend time with my family. Like maybe I shouldn't be a banker.
Hmm.
Like just seeing you even grow that way is
Yeah.
still fulfilling on my end.
I bet. So when you were a student mentor, could you talk about like most of what it was that you were actually doing? Because I know you mentioned like it's a matter of like discussing and letting them know their options, but could you like kind of walk me through generally what would happen every week or every month or whatever interval?
Yeah, so as a student mentor, there's like a couple of responsibilities. One
Hmm.
has to do with like programming.
Yeah.
So we have sort of general programming that all fellows go through, focus on just like professional personal development. So you can think
Hmm.
like communications, building your personal brand, your resume, etc. Things like you'll need or else what you want to do. So the
Yeah.
way we have those sessions up is like the leadership team sort of comes up with like lesson plans. And then we have
Hmm.
some of our student mentors kind of like make the deck and present it. So that way, one, it like emphasizes that community aspect because like you might
Hmm.
not know everyone if you don't get any FaceTime. So
Yeah.
there's a good opportunity for FaceTime there. And then the other big part is that one-on-one relationship. So we don't really have like a mandatory requirement as far as like frequency one would have to meet with their mentee or fellow. But
Hmm.
we usually say like at least every 2 weeks because there's always like questions and you want to build up
Yeah,
that sort of comfortable space.
yeah.
I think one thing we've been emphasizing a lot more too is like rather than matching people based on like sort of professional interests, the best sort of relationships are more so on like personal interests. Like if
Agreed.
you guys are
Yeah.
both into the same brand, both into
Hmm.
the same sport, etc. Like even if you guys have nothing real to talk about, like you guys are still gonna want to meet to talk about whatever that subject may be.
Yeah, I that last part I definitely agree with. I actually think most most of my networking is not like trying to like just be super professional with someone. I think it's usually like finding something that we have in common and talking about it. Even in interviews, I do that a lot. That makes sense. I think the last thing before I kind of move on to like a more universal lessons that you've gotten is like kind of like what is your goal with like the cohort? Because I know you're gonna graduate what in like 2 years or less. So like where are you trying to take this and like what's the end goal?
Yeah, I think obviously one goal is helping people discover what they want to do and helping them
Hmm.
get there. But I think as far as like making sure this is something that stands the test of time, that's like something that's super top of mind. And the way we kind of think about it is like we want Headstart to be like an ecosystem rather than like an organization. So that way there's
Hmm.
like something to do for you, regardless like where you are in sort of life and in college. So
Yeah.
you can think like let's say you join as a fellow as a freshman or a sophomore. You do that for let's say 1 to 2 years and then you can be a student mentor. And then
Hmm.
after like you're a student mentor, you can be like a programming lead, helping lead X programming, join our leadership team, etc. So we always
Yeah.
want there to be different roles that you can play. And then also we have like professionals involved and we call them like professional partners. So rather than getting assigned like a mentee or two, they're more so the point of contact, like when there's actual sort of niche questions that like you need sort of professional experience to answer, as well as we have them in like our community where like they talk about random stuff sometimes in Slack. It's pretty
Hmm.
funny. One of our professional partners, Katie, she graduated from Harvard undergrad, went to Stanford Business School, and like she made a B reel yesterday, and she was posted. She posted
That is
yesterday. She
funny.
was like, "I just made a B reel. I need you guys to add me so I can be cool or something." It's
That's
just like
funny.
seeing things like that is great because like she's very far out from undergrad, right? But she's still
Yeah.
playing a role in the ecosystem. So hopefully, like I 3 years from now, I'm like Katie, where I'm not super hands on, but I'm still in the ecosystem talking to people, helping out where I
That
can.
makes sense. That makes sense. I think that's like a I think that's a great answer too. Last question before I move on to the universal things that I just thought of. Other than having those professional partners, or it could just be the answer is professional partners. What are y'all doing differently? Because a lot of the things you mentioned when you listed off, like, oh, lessons plan, resume building, personal brand, I feel like I've heard in like BA 101 or like whatever, the intro to
Right.
business classes at whatever school. What are y'all doing differently to like from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it boils down to a couple of things. I think one is community again.
Hmm.
I think in like a lot of classes slash
Yeah,
orgs,
yeah,
like
that's true.
most classes slash orgs, like you don't actually talk to people outside of the org. You guys talk
Hmm.
because you guys have to for the org.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think that's like one big point. I think another thing too is like really just building that sort of flywheel where it's like
Hmm.
you get something out of it and then you want to put something into it. And
Yeah.
that there's always sort of something that you can get out of it. I'll
Hmm.
say those two things are like things that are unique, but even from like a programming perspective as well as like a mission perspective, like I don't know another org that their goal is like professional discovery. Like
Hmm.
there's a lot of orgs that are like again
That's
finance, tech,
true.
etc.
Yeah.
But like
Yeah.
one org is really trying to help you figure out what the right answer is. And I think like
Hmm.
if you don't answer that question, then you're probably gonna end up in a job that like you don't like and leave after like 6 to 12 months. And
Yeah.
like sort of thing you get out in finding the job that's actually best for you, whether it's like best for 2 years, 3 years, is a
Hmm.
lot more valuable than like a lot of in learning more finance technicals, right? Like that'll help you get
Yeah.
a job. Like, do you actually want that job?
Yeah. I agree with that. And I know that's even something right now that I'm still like battling with. As far as universal lessons go, I think a lot of students in one way or another generally do try to organize a group of students to do something, whether that's for a business, a student org, something else. Um, what do you think was kind of the biggest learning lesson there when it actually came down to like organizing? And so I don't know if you're like, do you like understand what I'm trying to get at? Like, not necessarily just an organization, but just that process of bringing students together and potentially mentors too.
Nah, I think that's a good question. Yeah, there are definitely a lot of interesting takeaways. I think
Hmm.
one, like incentives drive everything. So
Hmm.
like initially
Agree.
there wasn't really a well thought out and sort of incentive system,
Hmm.
but like over time people are starting to like we're starting to build out incentive systems as well as like people are starting to see like the value proposition and things they can get out of it. I think another thing too is like your team. Like you
Hmm.
can only do so much. And I think like one thing initially was like I was trying to do everything, but like I literally cannot. But
Yeah.
like over time we were able to build out a really good team where like there's people that are really good at X thing and like that X thing is very important for like this organization to survive. And like if
Hmm.
I were to do X thing, it would probably be like 50% worse. So really just
Yeah.
identifying your weaknesses early and trying to leverage like your team and building out a team that can sort of fill in the gaps as
Hmm.
like you can't do everything. Um, I'll say another thing too is like storytelling and marketing is very, very important. Like at
Yeah.
first, like I was all about like what's going on internally, let's build. But it's like you can have, I don't know, you can have a bar of gold, right? But
Yeah.
like if it just looks like a rock, like no one cares, right?
Yeah.
But if you're able to
I
wrap it
agree.
up nicely, tell the story, show
Yeah.
people what's going on, then like more people would be interested. And I think like at first we were just focused on like what's happening internally, but over time we realized like why don't we post like what event just happened? Like
Uh-huh.
why not? Like there's no sort of loss there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I agree. And you mentioned a lot of good points. The incentive thing, absolutely. I think that is something that people always glaze over and they think like people are just willing to do them service, but I think it's actually the opposite. And you like need to do even more to get everyone like all the pieces together. Um, I think the second thing you mentioned was like dividing out the work with the teams. That is something I've heard a lot of really, really, really smart people who I've like also talked in person and like also on this podcast have mentioned like your team literally your idea can be horrible, but if there's a really good team around it, that's like all really that needs to be there. And I know that's something I try to focus on a lot with like the projects I'm working on. And then lastly, which is actually what I want to get into, which is the storytelling part. Um, that I absolutely agree with. I've been like I've preached that since probably like before freshman year began because with like a speech and debate background, I always like put a bunch of emphasis on like the actual saying. And I know doing is important, but there's actually times where I think like saying is more important, and how you say it. So could you kind of tell us what the story you put forward is, or like how you created that, or like how you would recommend someone create a story?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, everything boils down to like problem, how you're the solution, and how you're the right solution or the unique solution. So
Hmm.
I think so you could think like product, sort of the founder, and then like founder market fit. I think that's
Yeah.
based like tech. So like with Headstart, I think one difference, like a lot of these sort of organizations that are like multi-school national orgs, is
Hmm.
like the people that run them aren't in school anymore. And
Yeah.
it's like that's one unique edge we have. Like we actually know what companies people want to work at, what are
Hmm.
people actually interested in, what are top concerns, etc. So like
Yeah.
when trying to talk with companies, when trying to talk with professionals, like we have sort of unique insight that like they just wouldn't know.
Hmm.
I think another thing along those lines too, kind of going back to like marketing, it's like TikTok.
Hmm.
It's like I don't know any org that's in a similar niche that's like they're
Yeah.
marketing TikTok very heavily, very
Hmm.
heavily, right? And that's like one thing we're sort of really dependent on. So yeah, I think it's like important to be able to identify like why you're the right person, sort of frame your sort of problem. Like when we first started, I think like we were just talking about mentorship, but
Hmm.
now we're able to narrow it down to like pretty specific things, right?
Yeah.
Professional discovery and helping you get to whatever that looks like within the business world. When like
Hmm.
at first, like I thought this was just gonna be an org where like we'd have a medical vertical, etc. But
Yeah.
it's you can't do 100 different things. Like we
Yeah.
focused on just the business world, and
Hmm.
that's where we're going to continue to focus.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's a good takeaway. I think just there can be value in like, for example, getting really deep into like TikTok as a form of marketing where a lot of people aren't. And I think TikTok in general has its advantages and is still fairly untapped when it comes to this, definitely this space. It's definitely untapped. So I applaud you for taking that step forward with TikTok. Would you say like what do you think, like, was there one time or like one moment where you were like, okay, like this is gonna work, or like that really like proved like was like a proof to you that this concept can work?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like a specific point in time, but just like over time here, seeing just people, a lot of people reach out to me saying like,
Hmm.
oh, I heard about Head Start through
Yeah.
X fellow, and like they've been having such a great experience. Well, let's like learn more when our application's opening. I think that's
Hmm.
always like it hits my heart. I'm like, wow, like I don't deserve this. And I think
Yeah.
another thing too is just when seeing people achieve things like one of our fellows, they grew up sort of without sort of consistent housing, and
Uh-huh.
like they sent me a message saying like this is their first time sort of in a position of financial security, and like,
Wow.
they don't think they would have passed their interview process without Head Start, as well as like they don't think they
Uh-huh.
would have got the opportunity. And for me, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I was literally on the bus in New York crying. I was like, wow,
Yeah,
like
no, that's insane.
so yeah, just
You're
really
changing
seeing,
lives out here, Ova. Like really,
yeah,
that
sure,
is,
so.
yeah, that is amazing. How do you balance like how do you balance doing this with school, with work, or like recruiting for work or whatever? Like what's your kind of way you maintain your schedule?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. Because we for me like this is what always comes to mind is like we all have 24 hours, right? And
Yeah.
somehow Elon Musk runs $3 billion
Hmm.
companies.
Yeah.
So like I don't really have much of an excuse. I'm just in class and I'm
Hmm.
recruiting and running
Yeah.
an organization. Like those
Uh-huh.
are probably very much easier feats. But I
Hmm.
think it's just like trying to build consistent habits. So like for me, I have like an hour blocked off every day. I just call it like my Head Start hour on my calendar where like I just do Head
Hmm.
Start specific stuff. I think another thing as far as like school stuff goes is just like trying to get ahead.
Yeah.
So like, don't do this week's homework, do next week's homework. Like you should have already done this week's homework. I
Yeah.
think another thing too that I like didn't do before is like actually using class time wisely. Like
Uh-huh.
before in class, I would probably be doing something else. And
Yeah.
then when I get home, I have to actually figure out what we just did in class. And
Hmm.
it's like it's pretty paradoxical, but I feel like a lot of us are guilty of that. Like we'll just open
Yeah.
something else on our computer.
Hmm.
So yeah, just actually utilizing sort of class time wisely. And I think it really just all boils down to like prioritization. So like if I have a big interview coming up or something, like I'll do more delegation during that period than if I
Hmm.
didn't have something like that, or if I had exams coming up, I do more delegation, etc. But yeah,
Yeah.
planning ahead and sort of prioritizing. Like if Elon can run $3 billion companies, you can do a couple of things.
I agree with that. I know I like I think for me at least the projects I'm working on, whether that's this podcast or other things can get really overwhelming. And when I say that, it's not even like, oh my God, there's so much stuff to do. It's like you have to do something, but then there's like 10 other things and then you can forget it and stuff like
Right.
that. Do you have a process? And then I can kind of share what I do to like handle things like that.
Yeah, for me, like I like to write things down.
Hmm.
I also like to just spend time to reflect. So
Yeah.
like usually when I wake up, I don't do anything. I might just sit on the ground for like 10 minutes and just think. So I think a
Uh-huh.
lot of people like we're quick to do, but oftentimes like we don't plan. So I
Hmm.
think just building out some time to like think. And then with like Head Start, we run a lot of like our productivity stuff on like Slack and Asana. So like
Okay.
just making sure like if I think of something, like I
Hmm.
don't need to write much, just make sure it's on Asana because like I'm gonna see it again on Asana and somebody else is gonna see it again on
Yeah.
Asana.
What
They're
is
gonna be like, oh, what is
Asana?
this?
What is Asana?
Yeah, so it's kind of like uh a business productivity platform.
Okay.
It's like you can think of it like a Google Tasks, but for a
Okay.
team. So like
Got it.
you can throw things under different projects, you can assign them to different people, you can put deadlines on them, you can put like subtasks that need to get done before the main task
Okay.
get
That makes
done.
sense. Yeah.
So it's like really, really helpful, especially when I think like when you're working with a really large team, it can be
Yeah.
chaos. But if you have like a team of
Hmm.
like 7 or 8, like it's perfect and it's free if you
Yeah.
use under 15 people. So
Hmm.
for us, that's been like super helpful.
That makes sense. And I do something kind of similar. It's not as organized, but there's like an app called Google Keep. And it's just like a really simple website. I was like using it since I was a kid. And I just jot down whatever for that. So I agree. I do the same thing. Um, that like I think the only other thing I would wonder when it comes to this is like when you are like you mentioned like that a competitive a competitive edge of Head Start is that you are a student, and I agree. I think there's a lot of advantages to that, especially because you're obviously a student that knows what they're doing, kind of knows the landscape. Um, but what about when you're not a student anymore? Are you just gonna hand the reins to like someone else?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think like one thing that's been top of mind literally since we first started is like thinking about like who's gonna run this after us.
Okay,
And I think
yeah.
like if I was to graduate today, like I already know who's gonna run the organization. Like they're already on our
Hmm.
leadership team. They were a fellow in our
Yeah.
cohort on, and like they were our best fellow. They're super
Hmm.
engaged, super bought into the mission. So I
Yeah.
think it's like it's an important part of like delegation is like slowly ramping those people up because like you don't want them to be yesterday be a fellow and today run the organization. But
Hmm.
it's like if you have a 1 year ramp up, like by the end of that year, you should be in a really, really good position to sort of run the org. So yeah, I do think that'll be like a consistent edge because I think the
Hmm.
flywheel that we have is pretty unique. Where like you come in, ideally as a freshman, not knowing much,
Yeah.
and you're a junior, and like now you're a student mentor. You have a
Hmm.
nice internship. We helped you get there, so you really feel incentivized and really bought into the mission. So yeah, I
Yeah.
do think it's very important to like plan very much ahead as far as like that goes because I've
Hmm.
seen like a lot of great orgs like slowly decline as
Yeah.
sort of original leadership team goes on to life.
Yeah, I agree, and I've seen that as well. Um, the last section here is just like with your personal goals, like what do you want to do? And like, is it like, are you just planning on like doing entrepreneurial stuff? Because a lot of the things you're talking about right now, and even in this podcast, is very much like it's. I mean, you're growing a business, even though it's just nonprofit.
Right.
And so like what is that, what are your goals there? You kind of want to go the corporate route? Like have you thought about it for yourself when it comes to like landscaping all the options?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say my long-term goal is to like either build a company or help scale a company. But
Hmm.
for me, the question is more so along the lines like, what do I do to get there, as well as like when do I want to do it and how do I want to
Yeah.
do it? I think like one thing that I've learned about myself over the last like 6 to 12 months is like I don't think I'm in the best position to like pick what company I would want to work for. Like I
Hmm.
had like a notes document with like companies I was interested in working in, and like
Yeah.
one of them's bankrupt now. Most of them, their stocks are down at least like 75%.
Uh-huh.
So like just understanding the fact that like I need to spend some more time in like developing my sort of mental models around like what works as like
Yeah.
time's most valuable asset. And I
Hmm.
think that's like one good selling point of like financial services and like consulting is like you're not dedicated to one thing and it gives you
No,
like
yeah.
more time to figure out what that one thing or what
Hmm.
one company may be. So I do
Yeah.
think like spending some time in like an investor seat, so like investing in similar companies that I'd be interested in working in would be helpful to like build out one,
Hmm.
my sort of Rolodex of connections. As well as like two of my mental models around like what works, what sort of team dynamics work, who are similar type of founders I like to work for, etc.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's a really good answer too. I share some of those sentiments as well, in terms of the end goal and how I'm gonna get there. But yeah, those were all my questions, Oba. This is now a chance for you to like plug anything. It could be Head Start's like TikTok page, your own like TikTok page. And if you have any parting advice, like now's your chance.
Yeah, I would definitely say for all the freshmen, sophomores listening, definitely follow us on LinkedIn. Our applications close on the 31st. I'm not sure if this will be up before then,
I'll
but
try to get it out.
if this is up before that, be sure to submit your application. It can be found on our website, headstartfellowship.com. If you want to follow us on Instagram, also at Headstart Fellowship. You can add me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn's my name, so that shouldn't be too hard to find. I'll say like as far as parting advice, I think life is like a pretty long journey. A lot of us get pretty like hell bent on certain things and stuck in like certain moments, but like we're all gonna get rejections, we're all gonna make mistakes, like we're all gonna have to bounce back from certain things. So really just like keep focused on the long-term sort of objectives and like usually compounding over a long period of time ends up being right for a short period of time. So I'll say that's kind of like my parting advice.
I agree with that. I think that's great advice. Well, thank you so much, Ova. Take care. Thank you for hopping on.
Sounds good. Have a good one.